Why did no one believe she could survive those first 90 seconds? Maybe it was the way she sat in that cockpit, quiet, patient, almost too calm. Or maybe it was because everyone at Echo Base thought Captain Addison Murphy was just a transport pilot, someone who hauled fuel and food and medical crates across the Pacific. Someone who followed flight plans rather than instincts. Someone safe, predictable, ordinary. But the moment the missile lock warning screamed through her cockpit, something inside her shifted, a memory, a muscle twitch, a ghost of a former self she hadn't allowed to breathe in years. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the old fear mixing with something sharper. Something she hadn't felt since she'd walked away from fighters. Something she wasn't ready to name yet. She didn't panic. She didn't freeze. She simply stared ahead at the horizon, where 10 enemy J-20s were descending on her unarmed C-130 like wolves closing in on a limping elk. Smoke streamed from her left engine. The airframe shuddered with every second of lost altitude, and her loadmaster Rodriguez whispered a prayer that sounded more like an apology. The radio was jammed, nothing but static, popping like distant gunfire. And in that broken, suffocating silence, she felt a familiar weight settle in her chest. You're about to die. But there was something she hadn't told anyone, not Echo Base, not her squadron, not the loadmaster sitting behind her trying not to cry. She hadn't told them what she used to be, what she had once trained to do, what she had spent years trying to bury. The airframe rattled again, and she blinked hard, pushing back the sting in her eyes. Fear wasn't new. Fear had lived with her since the day her little brother never came home, since the day she'd walked out of the F-22 hangar and never looked back, since the day she promised she would never again be the one who pulled the trigger. But promises had a strange way of burning up in situations like this. She rolled her shoulders once, slow and deliberate, as the first enemy fighter slid into gun range. The J-20 pilot probably saw a stationary target, a cargo plane warped by smoke, limping on 3 engines, pinned against a bright blue sky like something waiting to be put out of its misery. Easy kill, a formality, a statistic. Yet what he didn't see, what nobody saw, was the way Addison's fingers tightened around the controls. Not in fear, in memory. 15 years of buried instincts stretched awake beneath her ribs, like muscles shaking off dust, like an old friend whispering, "I'm still here." She didn't recognize herself when she spoke. "Rodriguez," she said quietly, "strap in tight." He looked up confused, sweat beaded across his forehead. "Ma'am, what are we doing?" Addison exhaled once, letting the breath steady her heartbeat. Something stupid. The J-20 opened fire. The sky erupted in streaks of cannon fire, ripping through the air where she should have been, where any normal cargo pilot would have been. But Addison snap-rolled the C-130 90 degrees, the massive transport groaning in protest as she forced it into a maneuver it had no right to survive. The loadmaster screamed, an instinctive, raw sound, as the left wing tipped toward Earth, the world flattening into a blur of metal and sky and violence. She didn't scream, she didn't blink, she simply flew. The fighter overshot, too fast, too confident, expecting a victim and instead meeting something unfamiliar, resistance. Addison steadied the aircraft with a calm so unnatural it felt borrowed. Not yet, she told herself. Don't think, don't remember, just fly. Another warning blared, more fighters closing, this time from both flanks. Classic bracket formation, predictable, cold, efficient. The kind of move she had once drilled into new recruits back when she trained Allied pilots in advanced air combat. A move she understood not because she'd read it, but because she had used it. Her throat tightened. She didn't want to remember herself in that role, not the way her commanders had praised her kills, not the way her brother had looked at her with a mixture of pride and fear. "You're the one they send when they need someone to survive," he had once told her. She hated that sentence more than anything in her life. The altimeter shrieked as she dove, hard, forcing the J-20s to adjust their angles. Her damaged aircraft shuddered, but her hands moved with precision. almost gentle motions, coaxing, persuading, shaping the airflow around the C-130 like she was carving space instead of flying through it. She heard Rodriguez muttering behind her again, a prayer, a curse, both. But Addison wasn't praying. She wasn't begging. She wasn't even thinking. She was simply returning piece by piece to someone she'd once been, someone she'd run from. The second pair of J-20s dived in from her right. She glanced at the reflection in her canopy, a flash of herself, eyes wide, jaw tight, a smear of sweat along her cheek. She barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked younger, sharper, hungrier. She hated that. She hated how natural it felt. She cut power to Engine 3 without warning. The whole aircraft yawed violently. Metal groaned, the nose dipped, the world tilted. The enemy pilots weren't expecting it. Their neat geometry shattered, misaligned, too late to correct. Two of them nearly collided, ripping past each other with only a few dozen feet to spare. Their perfect choreography broken by a cargo plane. Addison flicked engine controls, rebooting systems, throwing every ounce of her training into wrangling the aircraft back into a semi-stable line. Rodriguez stumbled forward, gripping a safety strap, eyes wild. "Ma'am, what was that? We almost died." Addison didn't look back. Almost is better than definitely. Her voice sounded different, cold, focused, the voice she'd buried. She pushed the C-130 into full throttle, engine screaming, the airframe vibrating like a living thing fighting for breath. Her hands danced across controls, adjusting trim and torque, tuning the aircraft like an instrument she knew better than her own heartbeat. This wasn't survival. Not anymore. It was challenge. A terrible, impossible challenge she hadn't asked for, but one she suddenly remembered how to meet. She knew the enemy flight lead was recalculating. She could almost feel him thinking. 10 fighters against one transport. They didn't have to rush. They didn't even have to be smart. They just had to be patient. But patience was a luxury they hadn't expected to need. She glanced at the dead radio. The quiet static felt like a weight on her chest. If she could have called for help, maybe she'd feel less alone. Maybe the panic crawling up her spine would have somewhere to escape. But with the radio jammed, the sky felt too quiet, too empty. Her breath caught. This was the part she hated, the silence before the storm. The feeling of being truly, utterly alone. Not just in the cockpit. In her history. In her choices. In who she'd become. She swallowed hard, forcing the emotion down before it cracked her resolve. She had left fighters because she couldn't carry the weight of lives on her conscience anymore. She had walked away because she didn't trust herself not to become someone cold, someone dangerous, someone efficient in all the wrong ways. And now she was slipping back into that person with terrifying ease. The threat display blinked, 4 fighters regrouping behind her, 6 above, all forming a coordinated kill chain. Her pulse hammered, but she held the controls gently, like she was holding something fragile. She whispered under her breath, almost too low to hear. "Not yet, you don't get to take me yet." And then, almost despite herself, a memory rose, her brother's voice, laughing as they raced down a dirt road in Colorado, their father's old pickup kicking dust beneath summer skis. "You always think faster when you stop trying to be perfect," he had teased. She exhaled shakily. For a moment, a small, aching moment, she felt like she was back there, younger, untouched by war, untouched by loss. Then the radar lit again. Another incoming attack. Addison lifted her chin, fingers steadying on the controls. She wasn't done. Not yet. And there was something she hadn't told them. Not the J-20 pilots. Not Echo Base. Not even Rodriguez. She wasn't flying like a transport pilot trying to survive. She was flying like the fighter pilot she had once been, the one she had buried, feared, and sworn to never resurrect. But sometimes, Survival doesn't ask permission. It simply demands the truth. And the truth was this. She remembered how to be deadly. And they were about to learn it. What made her hesitate for a split second wasn't fear of the fighters behind her. It was the realization that her hands, steady, precise, instinctive, felt too natural on the controls. Like they remembered a life she'd tried to erase. A life she'd sworn she would never return to. But right now, she didn't have the privilege of refusing the past. A sharp electronic tone pierced the cockpit, threat proximity alert. One of the J-20s had dropped down from the high perch and slid into a firing position. Sharp angle, closing fast. A perfect kill window. He was smart, patient, waiting for her to settle into a predictable pattern. She smiled, almost sadly. Predictable was the one thing she had never been. Addison rolled the C-130 hard left, pushing the aircraft so deep into the turn that warning klaxons flared. Metal strained. Rivets groaned. The whole airframe sounded like it was begging her to stop, but she held it, jaw clenched, sweat dripping down the back of her neck. The J-20 expected a transport pilot's fear, a desperate jink, a failed attempt to flee. He didn't expect a predator's turn. He overshot just slightly, but enough for Addison to yank the massive Hercules downward, letting the fighter streak past her belly with barely a second of separation. She could almost see the Chinese pilot's face, the confusion, the anger, the disbelief. Rodriguez fell against the bulkhead behind her as the aircraft steadied. "Ma'am, what the hell was that?" "A reminder," she whispered, her voice hollow, "of who I used to be." She hadn't meant to say it out loud. Another alert chimed, a different tone, sharper, insistent. "Multiple Lacons." She checked the threat display. 4 fighters below, 6 above, and now all of them aligning, coordinating, closing the noose. A strange calm filled her chest. Not acceptance, not fatalism, something different. Clarity. She remembered something her instructor once told her. A quiet, tired major who had survived so many dogfights he'd stopped glorifying them. In a hopeless sky, Murphy, the only move that works is the one they don't believe you're insane enough to make. She swallowed. Her fingers hovered over the engine controls. "You're not doing that," she whispered to herself. But she was. She killed power to 2 engines. Instant chaos, asymmetric thrust ripping the aircraft sideways, nose dropping, the cabin lurching violently. Rodriguez screamed again, not a panic scream this time, but a furious one. "Ma'am, are you trying to kill us?" Addison didn't answer. Her hands were a blur, rudder controls, yaw correction, pitch recovery, stabilizer trim, juggling the aircraft like it was a panicked animal fighting for its own survival. The J-20s reacted exactly how she expected. Confusion, misalignment, forced course corrections. They had committed to a single coordinated attack against a stable target, and she had stolen stability from the equation. 2 fighters veered off entirely. One broke formation early. The others hesitated, a deadly mistake in air combat. She whispered to herself again, "Never commit unless you're sure your enemy is predictable." She wasn't predictable, not anymore. Addison reignited both engines, the turbines screaming as they spun back to life. She leveled the plane with a grunt, her muscles trembling, her breath ragged, but she felt it immediately. The noose had loosened. Just a little. Just enough. Her heart pounded painfully against her ribs. The memory of her brother flashed again. Sunburned cheeks, worn boots, the Marine uniform he hadn't yet earned the day he told her he wanted to follow her into the military. She should have protected him. She should have convinced him not to go. Instead, he died carrying out orders she would never understand. That guilt never left. It lived inside her, coiled and patient, whispering that she didn't deserve to be in the sky anymore. She blinked hard, clearing her eyes as the South China Sea shimmered below. She wasn't fighting for glory. She wasn't fighting for revenge. She was fighting because one man she loved never got the chance to come home. And she wasn't going to fail the people behind her. Her voice cracked as she spoke into the dead radio, knowing nobody could hear it. "Just let me get them home, Aiden, please." A blip of static, faint, glitched, almost accidental, filtered through the interference. She froze. Her breath hitched. Echo bass. No, it wasn't clear enough. Could have been anything: electrical noise, frequency bleed, failing equipment. But she felt something in her chest loosen, hope, cautious and fragile. Rodriguez climbed back into the cockpit, wiping sweat from his brow. He was pale, shaking, but standing. "Ma'am, whatever you just did, please don't do it again." She almost smiled. "No promises." He dropped into the jump seat, fastening himself in like he expected the plane to roll again at any second. "It feels like you've done this before. A lot." She didn't respond. She couldn't, not without unraveling. Instead, she pointed toward the horizon. "They're adjusting, new formation." The J-20s were climbing now, going high again, reasserting control, smart, calculated, preparing for another coordinated strike. "They're learning," Rodriguez whispered. "Yes," her jaw tensed, "and that makes them more dangerous." She adjusted her throttle. Every vibration of the aircraft felt magnified now, every rattle, every pulse, every warning light flicker. Her brain was simultaneously in two timelines: the present battle and the years she'd spent flying the F-22, learning how enemy pilots thought, what they feared, how they reacted when pride collided with confusion. The J-20s would be angry now, embarrassed. Transport pilots weren't supposed to make them sweat. They weren't supposed to survive this long. That humiliation could make them sloppy or creative. She needed them sloppy. "Why are they pulling back?" Rodriguez asked quietly. Addison watched their arcs in the sky, her expression tightening. "They're setting up something big." He swallowed. "Like what?" She didn't answer immediately. She watched the altitude jumps, the spread patterns, the way the enemy lead was shifting his element positions. A memory surfaced, a classified combat drill she'd once flown against upgraded Raptors. A tactic used only when the priority was absolute annihilation of a single target. She whispered, barely audible, "A kill cage." Rodriguez stiffened. "That sounds bad." "It is." The fighters would build overlapping kill vectors from multiple altitudes and directions, compressing her escape space to zero. There would be no maneuvering room, no angles, no tricks. And that meant something terrifying. She was running out of sky. Her chest tightened, not fear, grief. Because for the first time since the engagement started, the outcome felt inevitable. Unless she did something reckless enough to make even a dead man shake his head. Her fingers hovered over the ramp controls. Rodriguez saw it and his eyes went wide. "Ma'am, no, 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 no. You cannot open the cargo ramp in flight." She didn't answer. "Ma'am, I swear if you—" "Rodriguez," she said softly, "I need you to trust me." He stared at her, breathing hard. She saw the fear in his eyes, real fear, the kind that comes when a person realizes they might die under someone else's decision. He swallowed. "I do trust you, but I also trust physics, and physics says we shouldn't be alive right now." She exhaled, steadying her own shaking hands. "We won't be, not if I don't do this." For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Two people hanging between life and death, between instinct and reason, between fear and something that felt strangely like faith. Rodriguez finally whispered, "Tell me what you need." Addison looked back at the sky, the kill cage tightening, the enemy closing, the seconds melting away. She felt her throat tighten again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something deeper, older. Acceptance. Not of death, but of herself. Rodriguez, she said quietly, I'm going to need you to rig everything. His eyes widened slowly. Everything like emergency flares, ground gear, the stuff we're not supposed to touch in flight. She nodded once. He stared at her like she was insane. Then somehow he nodded back. She took a breath so deep it hurt her chest. Good, she whispered, because what comes next they will never see coming. What terrified her more than the 10 fighters wasn't the missiles, or the gun runs, or the way death felt like it was circling closer with each pass. It was how calm she felt planning something she should never even consider in a transport plane. But calm didn't mean comfortable. Calm didn't mean ready. Calm simply meant she had accepted a truth she had been running from for years. Survival required becoming the version of herself she feared the most. She watched the J-20 spiral higher, climbing into the sun, building the three-dimensional kill cage with textbook precision. They would attack together, all 10 in one synchronized, brutal wave. No escape routes, no evasive geometry, no tricks, just sheer force and inevitability. Her pulse flickered once, an involuntary tremor. Rodriguez watched them too, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. Ma'am, how bad is this? She didn't sugarcoat it. Bad enough that if I miss the timing by a few seconds, we're gone. He closed his eyes for a moment, muttering something under his breath she didn't catch. Rodriguez, she said softly, I need the emergency flares ready. Every pallet, every crate, everything that burns hot. He groaned, head leaning back against the bulkhead. Why couldn't today have just been normal? Why couldn't we be hauling potatoes? She didn't have the heart or time to answer. He finally exhaled sharply and pushed up from the seat. All right, fine, I'll prep your suicide machine. He stumbled toward the cargo bay, muttering as he went. I swear, when we land, if we land, I'm filing the biggest complaint in the history of complaints. She almost smiled, almost. Then her eyes drifted to the sky again. Almost. The enemy formation was shifting, tightening, coordinating, they were ready. And the part of her she hated, the buried fighter pilot, whispered, so am I. The South China Sea glittered below, deceptively peaceful, a deep, endless blue stretching in all directions, so calm, so unaware. She wondered if this is how death appeared sometimes, beautiful, silent, indifferent. A beep echoed through the cockpit, altitude warning. She was still low, too low for typical maneuvers, too low for mistakes, but that had become her advantage. The lower she stayed, the harder it was for the J-20s to maintain firing angles without risking the ocean swallowing them whole. Water didn't care about pride. It killed pilots just as easily as missiles. She tightened her harness, fingers steady, breath slow. The cockpit smelled like hydraulic fluid, metal, and fear. Her fear. Rodriguez's fear. The fear she wouldn't admit. She whispered again, as though saying it made it real. We're not dying today. Static crackled faintly through her headset. Her heart skipped. Echo base, she whispered, is that you? More static, then silence. She felt something collapse inside her chest, not hope, but the version of hope that hurts worse when it disappears. Fine. She would do this alone. A sharp chirp snapped her focus back to the display. The enemy fighters were descending now, all 10, fanning out like a deadly crown around her, each one locking into attack vector. A cold rush slid down her spine. This was it. The moment every pilot dreads, when the entire sky becomes a weapon pointed at you. Her breath steadied. Her heartbeat slowed, not out of fear but out of something deeper, a strange, quiet acceptance. Rodriguez, she called. Just a sec, his voice echoed from the cargo bay. I'm trying to not accidentally blow us up back here. Now, she whispered, we're out of time. He reappeared at the cockpit door, panting, dust and sweat smeared across his face. Everything's rigged, ma'am. but I need to say this is the dumbest idea anyone has ever had." She looked at him. "Probably. Good, just making sure we agree." He moved behind her seat, gripping the back of it so hard his knuckles whitened. "What do you need?" he asked. "Ramp controls," she said. "Be ready." She saw the shift in his body, disbelief turning slowly into trust, or something close enough to trust during a crisis that it became indistinguishable. The altitude warning chirped again. The threat display flashed crimson. 10 fighters locked in. Then, without hesitation, she whispered the single word that sealed their fate or their survival. "Now." Rodriguez hit the ramp release. The back of the aircraft opened like a yawning steel mouth. The sudden drag slammed into them like a fist, jerking the C-130 sideways. Everything loose in the cargo bay was sucked toward the opening: crates, straps, debris. Rodriguez clung to a safety rail, swearing loudly enough to echo through the entire fuselage. "Ma'am, this is the worst idea in human history." Addison ignored him. She cut power to the inner engines again. Not one. Both. This time, the yaw was catastrophic. The C-130 twisted violently sideways, dropping altitude like a stone, the entire aircraft groaning under stress levels it was never meant to withstand. The G-force slammed her into her seat, her vision narrowing, flashing at the edges. Her brain screamed, "Pull up, pull up." She didn't. Not yet. The J-20s committed, all 10 coming in fast, expecting a predictable target. But they weren't hunting a transport pilot. They were hunting a ghost. Addison rolled the aircraft inverted. Upside down. Over the open ocean. With the cargo ramp wide open and 2 engines offline. Rodriguez didn't scream this time. He simply made a sound she couldn't interpret, a noise between awe, terror, and the realization that he would never be able to explain this to anyone if he survived. The J-20s fired. All 10 missiles streaked downward toward her engines. Addison whispered, "Rodriguez." He hit the flare release. The cargo bay erupted. Dozens of ground flares, never meant to be used in flight, spilled out into the sky behind her. The inverted aircraft created a starfall of burning magnesium and white-hot light. Flares tumbled, bounced, spun, filling the air with chaotic, impossible thermal signatures. The ocean reflected the light, turning the entire world into a blinding, shimmering web of heat. 10 missiles lost lock instantly. They soared into the cloud of flares, chasing the brightest signatures like blind, confused predators. Explosions detonated above and behind them, shockwaves rippling across the sea. Addison completed the split S, pulling the aircraft back toward level flight. Her arm muscles burned, her lungs ached, her heartbeat stuttered. The C-130 plunged toward the ocean, 200 feet, 150. She yanked hard on the controls. The aircraft skimmed the surface, so low the ocean mist sprayed across the lower fuselage. Rodriguez gasped, I can't feel my legs." Addison didn't look at him. She was fighting the aircraft too hard to breathe. But she made herself look once, at the battered console, at her trembling hands, at the sky behind them flashing with missile detonations and disoriented fighters. It wasn't over. But something had shifted. Something huge. Something she felt deep in her bones. The ghost she had buried wasn't gone. She was fully awake. And the fighters above, the ones still reorganizing, still processing their failure, they were about to learn what it meant to chase someone who refused to die the way they expected. She exhaled, steady, controlled. "Rodriguez," she whispered. "Why, yeah. Buckle in, the worst part is coming." He groaned, head falling back. "Ma'am, how can anything be worse than that?" Addison didn't answer. She looked at the threat display. The fighters were splitting again, this time into two hunting packs. And one thought curled like smoke through her mind. They're not trying to kill me now, they're trying to punish me. And punishment required creativity. She tightened her harness, lowered her chin, and prepared for the next impossible decision. Because she wasn't done. Not even close. What haunted her more than the explosions behind them wasn't the sound, it was the silence afterward. The sudden, eerie quiet of an aircraft that had just cheated death and wasn't sure it could do it again. The C-130 shivered in the air, battered, gasping through its damaged engines like a wounded animal. Addison could feel every vibration through the controls, as if the plane was whispering, "I can't do this much longer." She whispered back, just a little more. She wasn't sure if she was talking to the aircraft or herself. Rodriguez slumped behind her, pale as paper. His breath came in short, shallow gasps. "Ma'am, I think I've aged 10 years in the last 5 minutes." She almost smiled, almost, but her eyes were on the threat display, watching the J-20 formation shift again, not scattered, not confused, but adapting. The missiles had failed. Their kill cage had failed. Their coordinated attack had failed. So now they were changing tactics. And that scared her more than anything she'd faced so far. "They're coming in pairs now," she murmured, more to herself than to Rodriguez. "Rotating through high and low angles. They're trying to squeeze me against the ocean." Rodriguez groaned. Great, fantastic, because flying at 50 feet wasn't terrifying enough already. Addison didn't respond. Her mind was running faster than her heartbeat. The fighters were smart, each one fine-tuning their approach, adjusting for her unorthodox maneuvers, learning her rhythm. She didn't have a rhythm. That was the problem or the advantage, depending on how long she could maintain it. She was flying on instinct and adrenaline, not training, not muscle memory. Something deeper, something raw, the thing she had buried. She felt it now. The ghost of the fighter pilot she once was, moving inside her like a shadow. A shadow she had denied for years. A shadow that had saved her life twice in the last 10 minutes. Another warning tone blared. Two fighters descending fast. Opposite angles. Mirroring each other. A pincer. Her chest tightened. A pincer attack was brutally efficient, one fighter driving her down into the ocean, the other forcing her upward. No escape path. Death above or death below. She whispered, "Don't think, fly." The first J-20 dived in from above, nose hot, cannon armed. Addison pushed the C-130 lower, too low, the ocean rising up to meet them, waves racing beneath her belly like jagged teeth. Rodriguez squeezed his eyes shut. Ma'am, we're too low, we're way too low. We're not low enough." Her voice was steady. That scared her. The second fighter rose from below, angling upward into her blind arc. Addison did the unthinkable. She rolled the C-130 toward the rising fighter, directly toward him, presenting the aircraft's wounded belly instead of the more armored nose. Rodriguez screamed, "What are you doing?" Addison didn't answer. She didn't have time. She dumped power from the right engines, increased thrust on the left, and practically forced the massive aircraft into a sideways skid, something that should not have been physically possible for a transport plane. The C-130 tilted so sharply the left wingtip skimmed the ocean spray, slicing through vapor. The J-20 rising toward her hesitated, a fraction of a second, startled by the maneuver. A fraction was enough. He overcorrected, nose climbing too sharply, losing energy. Addison snapped the C-130 downward, dropping beneath his trajectory, letting his attack angle collapse. The two fighters collided in their escape paths, not physically, but geometrically, each one forced to maneuver sharply to avoid the other. Their coordinated attack shattered again. And Addison threaded between them, like a needle pulled through fabric. Rodriguez stared at her in disbelief. "You're not human." She didn't look at him. She didn't feel human. Her fingers trembled now, not with fear, but with a terrible realization. That felt good. Too good. The precision. The timing. The impossible threading of metal through space. Her brother's voice echoed in her mind again, softer this time. You were born for the sky, Addie. You just hate admitting it. A painful breath caught in her throat. I didn't want to hurt anyone, she whispered. Rodriguez frowned. Ma'am. She shook her head. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. The part of her that she tried to abandon, the part that was fluent in violence, fluent in angles, fluent in survival, was alive, awake, hungry, and if she let it fully take over, she didn't know who she'd become when this was over. But right now, the sky didn't care about morals. The sky only cared about survival. The threat display lit again. 4 fighters breaking from the high perch. 2 repositioning behind her. 2 more splitting wide to flank. They weren't frustrated anymore. They were angry. She felt the shift, a predator's rage. 10 hunters embarrassed by a wounded animal that refused to die. They're coordinating for gun runs, she said quietly. Rodriguez panicked. We can't dodge bullets, ma'am. She didn't answer. Her breath steadied once more, unnatural, eerie calm settling over her. Not because she wasn't afraid. Because she accepted fear. Because she embraced it. Because she knew something they didn't. Fighter pilots prefer distance. Guns require commitment. Guns require nerve. She waited. Waited until the first fighter committed to his dive. Waited until he lined up his shot. Waited until she felt his momentum lock onto her. And then she did something even crazier than opening the ramp. She turned into him. Hard. The J-20 pilot's eyes must have gone wide. No transport pilot would ever attempt a head-on geometry. No sane person would aim a wounded C-130 directly at a 5th-generation stealth fighter. But Addison wasn't sane now. She was awake. She was who she used to be. And who she used to be was someone who had flown Raptor combat drills against the best pilots in the world. Someone who had trained to weaponize psychology as much as physics. The J-20 flinched. Just a millisecond. Just enough. He pulled up too sharply, overshooting her right wing. The second fighter dove in too late to adjust and nearly clipped his wingman. 2 attackers neutralized again, without a shot fired. Addison exhaled shakily. Her vision blurred for a moment as adrenaline crashed through her system. She blinked rapidly, clearing it. Not time to crash. Not time to break. Not yet. Rodriguez leaned forward, voice trembling. Ma'am, how much longer do you think you can do this? She didn't know. The aircraft was failing. Systems flickering. Warnings stacking on warnings. Her muscles aching. Her breath shallow. The ghost inside her, the fighter pilot, was carrying her through pure instinct now. But ghosts couldn't fly forever. She scanned the horizon. Nothing. No help. No friendlies. Just open sky and death closing in. She whispered into the static. Viper flight, please tell me you're close. At first there was nothing. Then, a voice. Faint. Crackling. Barely cutting through the jamming. Cargo 72, 2 minutes out, hold on. Addison's eyes filled so fast she couldn't blink them clear. Relief. Fear. Hope. It all hit at once. But she didn't cry. Not now. Instead she whispered, 2 minutes, I can do 2 minutes. Even if her voice sounded like a lie. Even if the sky was already folding around her like a closing fist. Even if the fighters were forming up again. this time with a precision that told her they intended the next attack to be the last. She tightened her grip on the controls. 2 minutes. She just had to survive 2 more minutes. But the truth she didn't want to admit whispered back. In this sky, 2 minutes was a lifetime. Or a death sentence. How do you measure 2 minutes when death is closing in from every direction? Addison didn't know. She only felt the seconds stretching and collapsing all at once, like time itself was trying to tear her apart. Every beat of her heart felt too loud. Every breath tasted metallic, like fear and adrenaline had mixed into something sharp in her lungs. 2 minutes. That's what Viper flight promised. But promises didn't slow enemy fighters. The J-20s reformed above her, no longer scattered or confused. Their humiliation had hardened into something more dangerous: precision. They were flying tighter now, sharper, no wasted movement, no sloppy dives. They stopped underestimating her. And that meant she was out of tricks. Rodriguez leaned forward, gripping the back of her seat so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "Ma'am, they're circling again, all of them." Addison didn't respond. She saw the geometry forming, a perfect converging trap designed not to kill quickly but to make escape mathematically impossible. 10 fighters in a ring descending at staggered speeds and angles. No gaps, no openings, no chaos to exploit. They were done playing. Her breath trembled as she whispered, "They're trying to box me in, a compression ring." Rodriguez's voice cracked. "In English, please." "In English, we're out of sky." He went quiet. Addison's fingers tightened on the yoke. She felt the sweat pooling in her palms. She felt her own pulse thudding in her ears. She felt the C-130 shuddering under her, tired, wounded, straining against physics it was never meant to challenge. 2 minutes. She wasn't sure she had 2 seconds. The first pair of J-20s descended, guns hot. Addison jerked the C-130 into a low, sharp dive, lower than even she was comfortable with. The ocean skimmed beneath them, waves breaking into mist as the aircraft carved the air with violent wobble. Rodriguez's voice broke into a strangled shout. "We're going to hit the water." "Not today," she murmured. But she wasn't sure. The altimeter screamed, numbers flashing red. Addison could see individual whitecaps now, the way sunlight glinted off each one. Too close, too fast. She pulled back at the exact second a burst of cannon fire ripped through the space the aircraft had just occupied. Tracers streaked past the cockpit, close enough to feel their heat. Rodriguez flinched. "We can't keep doing this, we can't." "I know." She didn't say it softly to comfort him. She said it quietly because she meant it. She knew. She was at her limit. The plane was at its limit. The sky was at its limit. The second pair dove in. Then the third. Then all 10. A synchronized, merciless storm. Addison stared at the threat display, at the swirling arcs of red converging like claws. Her vision stuttered for a second, a warning sign she was pulling GS too sharp for too long. She blinked hard, clearing the haze. "Come on, stay with me." The plane dipped again. She fought it, muscles screaming, controls shaking beneath her hands. Rodriguez whispered, "Ma'am, I don't want to die." She swallowed hard. "Neither do I." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't bark orders. She felt too tired for that, too raw. Her throat ached like she'd swallowed the entire ocean. She looked at the fighters circling, closing, tightening. They saw prey. But they didn't see the thing she was finally admitting to herself. She wasn't done fighting. Not yet. Not for a long time. Not while someone needed her alive. Rodriguez's voice shook. "Ma'am, what's the plan?" She didn't have one. Not a real one, not a sane one, just a feeling, a whisper from the shadow inside her, the voice she had tried to bury. The fighter pilot. It spoke in angles and velocity. It spoke in instinct. It spoke in math so old to her that she didn't even have to think about it anymore. She tightened her harness. Hold on. Rodriguez swore, I hate when you say that. Addison pitched the C-130 into a rising turn, not a full climb, but a slanted angle that forced the J-20s to adjust their approach. The fighters on the right accelerated. The ones on the left slowed. The formation ripple was small but real. A tremor in the cage. But not enough. Her mind raced. Her heartbeat thundered. She saw the angles forming, the way the fighters were adjusting their vectors, the way they were compensating for her altitude. And she realized something. They were too synchronized. Perfect synchronization was predictable. She whispered, left, left, left now. She yanked the C-130 into a hard skid turn. The plane protested violently. Warning lights erupted. Metal groaned. The J-20s reacted, split-second adjustments, but they had aligned too perfectly. When she broke the plane sideways, their angles overlapped. 3 fighters nearly collided. One pilot panicked and pulled vertical. Another cut too sharply and bled speed. Rodriguez gasped, you made them trip over each other. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She saw something else. One fighter was right where she didn't want him. Behind her. Perfect alignment. Perfect speed. Perfect firing window. Addison exhaled slowly. He's got me. Rodriguez froze. What? No, 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 no. The J-20 behind her descended, nose aligned with her engines, ready for the kill shot. Addison didn't try to maneuver. She didn't dodge. She didn't fight. She did something worse. She leveled out. Rodriguez screamed, what are you doing? She whispered, trust me. She watched the fighter behind her, watched his steady, perfect descent, and she felt a strange, terrible calm settle in her. He thinks I've given up. He thinks I'm done. Then she whispered into the open radio channel, knowing the enemy was listening. Cargo 72 to any friendly aircraft, I'm defenseless. Repeat, I am defenseless. Rodriguez stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Ma'am, what if no one hears you? They will. How do you know? She didn't answer. Because the truth was simple. She didn't know. But she believed. Her brother once told her that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting anyway. So she flew straight. Exposed. Vulnerable. Accepting. The J-20 behind her tightened his lock. His missiles armed. His cannon ready. Addison kept flying straight. The fighter pilot inside her, the ghost, whispered, 2 seconds. Rodriguez sobbed, please no, please no. 1 second. Addison's voice cracked. Now. The sky above erupted. 2 F-35s ripped into view like twin spears through the clouds, contrails slicing downward at impossible speed. Missiles streaked from their wings. The J-20 behind her exploded into a burst of fire and metal before he ever pulled the trigger. Rodriguez screamed, not in terror this time, but in something like pure, unfiltered hope. Addison sagged into her seat, breath shaking, vision blurred with tears she didn't remember letting fall. A voice crackled in her headset, strong, clear, and furious. Cargo 72, this is Viper Lead, hold on, we've got you. Addison closed her eyes. Relief washed over her so suddenly it hurt. Viper Lead, she whispered, voice breaking. You took your time. Major Sarah Blackwood's voice replied, fierce and breathless. Let's finish this fight. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Addison felt something she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't alone in the sky. She had forgotten what it felt like to hear another pilot's voice in her headset, a real voice, human, controlled, confident, not the silence of jamming, not the static of an empty sky, a voice that cut through the chaos like a hand reaching into the dark. Cargo 72, Viper lead, you're covered. Stay low, we're engaging. Addison didn't realize she was gripping the yoke so tightly her knuckles had turned bone white. She forced her fingers to relax just a little, just enough to breathe again, just enough to believe she hadn't already died and imagined this. Two F-35s streaked overhead, vapor trails slicing through the sun, their shadows racing across her fuselage like a promise. Rodriguez slumped into the jump seat, chest heaving. We're saved, oh my God, we're actually saved. Addison didn't respond. Her eyes remained locked on the sky. Because saved wasn't the right word. Not yet. Not with 8 enemy fighters still circling above like vultures, deciding who to strike first. The threat display lit again, red triangles converging toward the F-35s. Blackwood's voice echoed through the cockpit, sharp and controlled. Cargo 72, maintain evasive pattern but don't climb. We'll draw them off. Addison's throat tightened. Negative, Viper lead. If I climb, I become a target again, and I'm out of tricks. Blackwood didn't hesitate. You don't need tricks, just stay alive. Addison almost laughed, bitter, cracked. Staying alive is a trick at this point. But she didn't say it out loud. Instead, she adjusted her course, keeping the aircraft low, letting the ocean's surface blur beneath them like a rolling sheet of steel. The C-130 trembled harder now, its structural fatigue worsening. One engine coughed smoke. Another vibrated at a pitch she didn't like. She could feel the aircraft failing under her hands, like a living thing fighting to stay upright. Rodriguez watched the broken console. Ma'am, we're not gonna make it far. Addison swallowed. We just need to make it long enough. Above them, the sky erupted. Missile trails tangled like silver threads. Flares bloomed. Radar locks pinged. The remaining J-20s dove in tight clusters, firing and peeling away with brutal efficiency. 2 F-35s against 8 enemy fighters. Addison's heart clenched. Blackwood wasn't just fighting. She was buying Addison time. Every second felt like a stolen miracle. Come on, Addison whispered under her breath. Come on, you two, stay alive. Rodriguez gripped the seat again. Shouldn't we, I don't know, help? She almost smiled. Rodriguez, we don't even have weapons. His eyes darted around the cockpit. We have tape, anger, a spare toolkit. Weighs us down. So nothing. Nothing. But an idea flickered in her mind, reckless, stupid, rooted in instinct and memory. She shoved it aside. Not yet. Not unless she absolutely had no other option. The sky above crackled with radio calls, short, clipped, deadly. Viper lead, Fox 3. Splash 1. Viper 2 defensive, chaff chaff. Bandit group at your 5 o'clock. Missile inbound, break left. Addison could picture every maneuver, every angle, even without seeing it. The rhythm of combat was burned into her bones. It was terrifying and beautiful in a way she hated admitting, like watching dancers who knew death was the price of a misstep. And Viper flight was outnumbered. Badly. Addison forced herself to focus on flying, not watching, but each radio call carved into her nerves. Then she heard it, the sound every pilot dreads. Blackwood's voice, tight and clipped. Viper 2 hit, stabilizing, I'm still flying. Rodriguez's eyes widened. Oh no, oh God. Addison didn't breathe. Not until the next call came. Viper lead, engaging 2 on my tail. Cargo 72 status. Addison steadied her voice. Still alive, barely. Keep it that way. She wanted to say something back, something strong, something brave, but all she could think about was the fragility of the moment. One mistake in the air, one miscalculation, one lucky shot, everything could unravel. The C-130 shook again, a deep, unnatural shudder. Alarms blared. Rodriguez braced. Ma'am, what was that? She checked the gauges. Structural stress. We're pushing this aircraft too hard. Can we slow down? Not unless you want to get shot. So, we're just gonna pretend that sound was normal. Pretty much. He groaned into his hands. Another call cut through the radio. Viper lead to Cargo 72. 2 bandits breaking off and heading toward you. Rodriguez swore. Why, we're practically dead already. Because they want to finish the job, Addison whispered. Her stomach twisted. Her pulse spiked. Everything inside her screamed to climb, to run, to hide. But she stayed low. She had to. The ocean was her shield. The C-130 couldn't outrun fighters. Couldn't outclimb them. Couldn't outgun them. But it could disappear in the noise of sea clutter, just enough to distort a radar lock, just enough to force the enemy to drop low. And low altitude meant danger for fighters. An idea sparked in Addison's mind, risky, insane, born from desperation. Rodriguez. Yes, his voice was already terrified. I need you to look at the altimeter. He leaned forward. Ma'am, that's 40 feet. I know. That's too low. I know. That's suicide. She didn't answer. The 2 J-20s descended toward her, fast, shallow angle, guns armed, confident. Too confident. Addison whispered, come on, follow me down. Rodriguez's eyes widened as he realized her plan. No, no, absolutely not. This is how pilots die. Addison cut him off. This is how I make them hesitate. She dropped the C-130 lower. 30 feet. 28. 25. The turbulence became violent, hitting the belly of the plane with unpredictable force. Rodriguez held on with both hands, eyes squeezed shut. Above them, the fighters dropped fast, coming down to meet her. Addison whispered, closer, closer. When the J-20s reached 28 feet, their wings began to buffet. At 26 feet, their onboard computers started screaming altitude warnings. At 24 feet, they had a choice. Pull up, or risk smashing into the sea. One of them broke first, jerking upward violently. The sudden change destabilized his wingman's line. Addison seized the moment. She pulled up sharply. Not enough to climb. Just enough to disrupt the airflow behind her. The second J-20 pilot panicked, rolled too hard, overcorrected, and dipped one wingtip into the ocean. The sea tore him apart instantly. Rodriguez flinched, gasping as debris sprayed upward. Holy ma'am, you killed HIM. No, Addison said quietly, almost mournfully. He killed himself. She meant it. Every word. She felt no victory. Only the echo of what she used to be. And the weight of what she never wanted to become again. The surviving J-20 pulled vertical, shaken, retreating upward in fear or shock. Addison whispered, one down. Rodriguez swallowed, and the other. She looked ahead. The second fighter wasn't retreating. He was climbing. Fast. Too fast. Straight toward the F-35's engagement zone. Addison's heart stuttered. He's not coming for me. Rodriguez blinked. Then who? A voice exploded through the headset. Viper lead defensive, bandit on my 6, braking. Addison's blood ran cold. Blackwood was in trouble. Real trouble. And the J-20 chasing her had altitude, energy, speed, and position. Rodriguez whispered, barely audible, ma'am, we can't help her. We can't fly up there. Addison didn't breathe. Didn't blink. Didn't think. She only felt that old shadow inside her rise, the fighter pilot she'd buried, reaching for the controls. Not out of violence. Not out of pride. But out of something she couldn't ignore. She couldn't lose another person she cared about in the sky. Not again. Not like her brother. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Yes, we can." And then she shoved the throttles forward. All of them. Toward the fight. Toward the danger. Toward the one thing she promised she'd never do again. Re-enter air combat. In a cargo plane. For a split second, Rodriguez just stared at her. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked like a man trying to decide whether to scream or faint. Then he grabbed the nearest strap and yelled the most honest sentence of the day. "Ma'am, no, I did not sign up for Cargo 2 air combat." Addison didn't hear him, not fully, not consciously. She was already somewhere else, somewhere deep in a part of her memory she wished she'd never have to revisit. The place where instinct lived, the place where logic died, the place where fighter pilots stopped thinking and start hunting. Except she wasn't hunting. She was saving. And that made all the difference. The C-130 roared upward, trembling violently under its own weight. Every alarm seemed to go off at once. Hydraulic system strain, overstress, engine vibration, altitude limit, temperature spike, pitch instability. Rodriguez screamed over the noise, "Ma'am, this plane cannot do this." Addison whispered, "It has to." It wasn't courage that pushed her forward. It wasn't adrenaline. It was something quieter, thinner, sharper. A memory. Her brother, younger by 3 years, grinning as he sat in the backseat of their father's old truck. "Addie, if I ever get stuck somewhere dangerous, you better come get me yourself. Don't ever leave me hanging." He never got the chance to call her. But Blackwood had. A call for help wasn't always words. Sometimes it was just the sound of a pilot breathing too fast. Addison climbed at an angle that should have snapped the wings. The C-130 groaned like metal was tearing somewhere unseen. Rodriguez pressed his head against the seat. "We're going to die, we're going to die, we're going to." "No," Addison murmured, "not today." The ocean fell away beneath them. The sky opened. And the fight was waiting. 2 F-35s tumbled through the blue above like sparks kicked out of a fire. One of them, Blackwood, was defensive, rolling violently, her tail section trailing smoke. A J-20 clung to her like a shadow, matching her every move with ruthless precision. Addison recognized the pattern instantly. A pursuit curve. The kind that killed good pilots. Blackwood wasn't being outflown. She was being outpositioned. Addison scanned the angles, the geometry unfolding in her mind like an old instinct waking up. She whispered, "He's setting up for a high guns pass. He wants a quick kill." Rodriguez peeked over her shoulder, horrified. "How can you possibly tell?" "Because," she said quietly, "that's exactly how I was trained to do it." The J-20 tightened his line. Blackwood broke right, nose dropping. A defensive split, but she was bleeding energy. Addison could hear it in her voice even through the clipped radio calls. "Viper lead defensive, I can't shake him." Addison's heart clenched. Her brother's last radio call, the one before the ambush, had sounded like that. A mixture of composure and something darker. The sound of someone bracing for an outcome they already felt coming. "Not again. Not again. Not again." Addison's voice shook. "Hang on, Major." She pushed the C-130 harder. Rodriguez's voice cracked. "Ma'am, we can't enter that dogfight. We're flying a folding truck." But Addison wasn't aiming for the dogfight. She was aiming for the geometry. The J-20 tracked Blackwood downward. The F-35 dived, trying to shake him. The Chinese pilot mirrored each move with confidence. Perfect control, perfect speed, perfect closure. He had her. He knew it. She knew it. Addison saw the angle tightening, the moment before a gun run where everything lines up, where the world narrows to a single point. Blackwood's voice shook through the radio. He's close, he's too close. Rodriguez slapped the console helplessly. We can't do anything. Addison whispered, yes, we can. Because she saw it, saw the angle no fighter pilot would ever expect a cargo plane to enter, saw the single thread in the airspace where her lumbering C-130 could become a weapon without firing a single shot. Her heartbeat slowed. Her breathing steadied. And that old voice, the one she feared most, whispered, do it. Addison rolled the C-130 into a shallow dive. Rodriguez screamed, why are we going down? The fight is up there. Addison didn't answer. She wasn't going after the fight. She was going after the timing. The J-20 had committed fully now, locked into his firing pass on Blackwood. He thought the sky belonged to him. He thought Blackwood was finished. He thought no one could possibly intervene in time. Especially not from below. Addison whispered into the radio, Major, drag him toward me. Blackwood gasped, Cargo 72 what? Addison didn't repeat it. Because Blackwood understood. In a terrifying, instinctive moment, she understood. She broke her dive early, rolling left, dragging her pursuer across the arc Addison was climbing toward. The geometry snapped together. Addison rose into the line of fire, not into danger, but into the blind spot of the chasing fighter. The J-20 pilot never expected it. Cargo planes didn't climb like that. Cargo planes didn't maneuver like that. Cargo planes didn't fight. Addison turned directly into his path. Rodriguez's scream cracked the air. We're going to collide. Addison whispered, he'll break. Her eyes locked on the incoming fighter. For a moment, time froze. Her brother's face flashed in her mind, smiling, alive, full of possibility. She felt him watching her, felt him sitting in that truck again, felt him asking the question he never got to ask. Would you come for me? Her answer came as she held the C-130 steady. Yes. The J-20's collision alarms would have screamed at him. He jerked his aircraft away violently, abandoning the kill shot on Blackwood. Now Major, break. Blackwood rolled, reversed, and came around with perfect speed and lethal alignment. Her cannon burst shredded the J-20's left engine. The fighter spiraled, the pilot ejecting a second before fire consumed the fuselage. Addison sagged in her seat. She wasn't shaking because of fear. She was shaking because she had just willingly thrown herself into the path of a lethal fighter jet. Rodriguez stared at her with wide, horrified eyes. Ma'am, you're insane. Addison didn't argue. She wasn't sure he was wrong. Blackwood's voice broke through the radio, breathless, stunned. Cargo 72, what the hell did you just do? Addison let out a long, trembling breath. Something stupid. No, Blackwood said softly, something brave. Addison closed her eyes. No one had called her brave in years. Before she could respond, another call tore through the radio. Bandit 2 breaking off Bandit 3, repositioning, Viper 2 fuel critical. Addison opened her eyes. The fight wasn't over. Not even close. And her C-130, trembling, burning, leaking, barely holding itself together, was now in the center of an air battle again. Not hiding. Not running. Not surviving. Helping. Rodriguez wiped his forehead. Ma'am, please tell me we're not doing any more heroic maneuvers. Addison saw the remaining J-20s shifting, regrouping, and realized something chilling. They weren't retreating. They were committing. All six. Toward her. Rodriguez's voice cracked. Why are they coming for US? Addison tightened her grip on the controls. Because she knew the answer. Because we embarrassed them. She exhaled slowly, feeling her heartbeat steady again. And now they want revenge. Rodriguez whispered, What do we do? Addison lifted her chin. We do what we've been doing since this started. What's that? She stared at the 6 fighters descending in perfect kill formation. We survive. The sky had grown quiet. Not peaceful, never peaceful, but quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Wrong. Like the air itself was holding its breath. 6 enemy fighters circled above, adjusting, aligning, weaving a net of angles around her wounded C-130. Rodriguez whispered, "Ma'am, is this how it ends?" Addison didn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because she refused to know. Not yet. Not before she'd done everything she could. Not before she'd drained every instinct, every memory, every ounce of courage left inside her. She steadied her breathing and leveled the plane. The controls shook more violently now. The engines rattled as if begging her to stop. Warning lights strobed across the cockpit in a rhythm that felt like a countdown. Blackwood's voice broke into the headset, ragged from stress. "Cargo 72, keep your altitude. We're repositioning." Addison saw the F-35s damaged, leaking fuel, burning time they didn't have, limping back into the fight. Heroes held together by willpower and duct tape. She wanted to believe they could hold off 6 fighters. She wanted to believe they could protect her. But belief wasn't geometry. And geometry didn't lie. 6 fighters. 2 defenders. 1 crippled cargo plane. Rodriguez exhaled shakily. "Ma'am, they're not going for Viper. They're locking onto us." Addison saw it too. All 6 triangles on her threat display. Shifting. Tightening. Aiming at her. They weren't hunting a threat. They were hunting humiliation. Addison swallowed hard, because we made them look weak. Rodriguez's voice cracked. "In a cargo plane, that's the part that stings, isn't it?" Addison would have smiled if she had the strength. She didn't. Every nerve felt stretched, like her body was a wire pulled to its breaking point. Blackwood radioed again. "Cargo 72, they're not after you. They're after the story of you." Addison froze. That was it. That was the truth. This wasn't combat. It was message sending. Blackwood continued, breathless. "They want to erase what you did. They want no one to ever know a transport pilot outflew them." Addison felt something tighten deep inside her chest. Not fear, not pride, but something older. Something like clarity. She took a slow breath. "Major, can you stop them?" A painful silence. Then, "No." The word hit her like a physical blow. Rodriguez's voice rose, panicked. "What do you mean, no?" Blackwood didn't sugarcoat it. "We're out of missiles, out of fuel, out of options. We can drag a few away, but not all." Addison closed her eyes. So this was the moment. The one every pilot feared. The one her brother reached. The one she never thought she'd face again. The moment you realize no one is coming. And that you can't outrun the end. Rodriguez gripped the back of her seat like a man begging gravity itself to stop. "Ma'am, please, please tell me you have a plan." She didn't. Not until the last remaining spark of instinct flared, the part of her brain she'd been fighting since the first fighter appeared. The part that remembered every dangerous maneuver she ever learned. Every suicidal tactic instructors warned about. Every impossible scenario her brother used to joke about beating. And the one forbidden tactic fighter pilots whispered about. The shadow drift. A defensive move so reckless it was considered self-destructive, unless executed with perfect timing. Addison opened her eyes. "Rodriguez, I need you to trust me." He stared at her, horrified. "Ma'am, every time you say that, something terrible happens." "This time," she whispered, "something necessary will." The 6 J-20s broke formation, spreading into a staggered predatory arc. 1 from above, 2 from the sides, 3 forming a funnel behind. Rodriguez gasped. They're going for a simultaneous kill shot. Addison nodded. Exactly. Exactly. How is that good news? Addison adjusted her controls, feeling the wind shear tug against the wings. Every muscle in her arms burned. She counted the fighters by instinct. 6, 5, 4. The J-20 closing from above fired first, a long burst meant to force her downward. Addison dove, but only slightly, just enough to make him correct, just enough to make him misjudge. 3, 2. The left pair tightened their line. Their cannons lit up. She banked just enough to make them overshoot. 1. The fighters behind her accelerated, lining up for a perfect rear guns pass. Rodriguez screamed, "Ma'am, he's going to shoot us in the back." "I know." Addison throttled back. Hard. The C-130 lurched. Rodriguez slammed into the seat. Loose equipment rattled violently. Addison whispered, "Shadow drift, engage." The J-20 behind her was too close. Too fast. Too committed. He pulled up to avoid colliding, his nose lifting sharply. Too sharply. Addison yanked the C-130 into a micro-roll, a half-second slip to the right, then a violent left snap. The airflow behind her split. The J-20's sensors temporarily lost track. He overcorrected. Addison whispered, "Come on, lose it." The enemy fighter tilted, wing lifting too hard, angle breaking. In the space of a heartbeat, the pilot's miscalculated maneuver crossed the critical limit. And his wing snapped. The J-20 spun violently, slamming into the sea in a burst of spray. Rodriguez stared in disbelief. He just crashed. Addison didn't gloat. Didn't celebrate. She felt tired. So tired. Every victory today tasted like loss. Blackwood's voice gasped through the comms. "Cargo 72, how are you still alive?" Addison couldn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because the fight wasn't over. 5 fighters remained. Rodriguez breathed, "Ma'am, we can't do that again." "No," Addison whispered, "we can't." The skis above shimmered, 3 fighters diving, 2 climbing, creating a pincer designed to break even the fastest aircraft. And she was in a C-130 held together by hope. But then, a voice cut through the radio. A voice deep and resonant. A voice that didn't sound fatigued or afraid. "Viper lead, this is Falcon Squadron. We're here, and we brought friends." Addison's breath caught. 7 F-18s tore through the clouds in perfect formation, sunlight flashing across their wings like a blade being drawn. Rodriguez shouted, "Yes, yes, yes, finally." Blackwood exhaled a broken laugh. "Falcon Squadron, engage at will." And they did. The sky erupted. Missiles streaked, cannons burst. The remaining J-20 split to escape the sudden onslaught, but they were outnumbered now. Outmatched, outflown. One by one they went defensive, then desperate, then silent. Within 3 minutes, it was over. The sky grew quiet again. But this time it was a peaceful quiet. A living quiet. Blackwood's voice crackled softly over the comms. "Cargo 72, Addison, are you still with us?" Addison sagged into her seat. Her hands trembled on the controls. Tears she didn't remember forming slid down her cheeks. She whispered, "Still here, Major." "Good," Blackwood breathed, "because you just made aviation history." Rodriguez laughed, a loud, disbelieving, half-sobbing sound. "Ma'am, we're gonna need so much therapy after this." Addison finally let herself smile. A small one. A tired one. A real one. She guided the broken, scarred C-130 toward friendly airspace, limping, groaning but alive. As the sun lowered on the horizon, lighting the cockpit in gold, Addison felt a peace she hadn't felt in years. Not victory. Not triumph, just peace. The kind that comes only after facing the thing you fear most and walking out the other side. Blackwood's voice came one last time, gentle and raw. Addison, today you reminded me of something. Addison closed her eyes. What's that? That dignity doesn't shout. A pause. It just acts. Addison let the words settle in her heart. Maybe she wasn't a fighter pilot anymore. Maybe she never wanted to be one again. But today, she discovered something truer. Sometimes strength isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't roar. Sometimes strength is a quiet woman in a wounded aircraft, choosing to rise anyway. Because courage doesn't always win wars. Sometimes it just keeps someone alive long enough for help to arrive.